Now get comfortable and relax. The cat hasn't blinked in 17 minutes. I know this because I've been watching him from the kitchen doorway, coffee growing cold in my hands, counting the seconds on the microwave clock behind me. His orange fur stands in rigid spikes along his spine, and his eyes, those pale green eyes that usually track birds through the window with lazy indifference, are fixed on the corner of the living room where the two walls meet the ceiling. There is nothing there. I have checked. I have checked so many times that I've memorized every crack in the plaster, every faint water stain from the previous owner's neglected roof. Nothing. But he sees something. Every night now, at exactly 3:14 a.m., he sees something. My wife stopped coming downstairs with me 2 weeks ago. She says I'm making it worse by watching, that cats do strange things and that's just what they are. Strange creatures with strange instincts we can't understand. She's probably right. She's usually right about these things, about my tendency to find patterns in chaos, to see meaning where there is only coincidence. The therapist I stopped seeing 3 years ago said the same thing, though he used different words. Hypervigilance, he called it. A symptom, not a skill. But the therapist never saw my cat's pupils dilate to swallow the green entirely, leaving only black mirrors that reflect something I cannot see. We bought this house 8 months ago, a Victorian-era farmhouse at the edge of town where the streetlights give way to empty fields. The real estate agent called it charming and full of character, which I've since learned is code for the floors creak in ways that sound like footsteps, and the walls breathe when the temperature drops. My wife fell in love with the bay windows and the original hardwood. I fell in love with the price, which was suspiciously reasonable for a house this size. I didn't ask why. I should have asked why. The previous owners left in a hurry, according to the neighbors, an older couple who had lived here for 37 years. One morning, a moving truck appeared, and by evening, the house was empty. No forwarding address, no explanation. The woman next door, a retired schoolteacher with kind eyes and nervous hands, told me this while looking over my shoulder at the house behind me, as if she expected something to be watching from the windows. When I asked if she knew why they left, she smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes and said some houses just aren't meant for certain people. I didn't understand what she meant then. I'm beginning to understand now. The scratching started 3 nights ago. I woke to the sound at 4 a.m., a rhythmic rasp that I initially mistook for branches against the window. But there are no trees on that side of the house, only the empty field that stretches toward the horizon, where nothing grows but weeds and silence. I found the cat in the living room, his front paws working against the wallpaper in that same corner, the one he stares at every night. He was scratching with a desperate intensity I'd never seen in him before, his claws tearing through the faded floral pattern to expose the plaster beneath. I pulled him away, and he fought me. Actually fought me, twisting in my grip with a strength that seemed impossible for his small body, yowling in a pitch I didn't recognize. When I finally got him into the bedroom and closed the door, he threw himself against it for 20 minutes straight. My wife slept through it somehow, or pretended to. In the morning, she didn't mention the scratches on my forearms. The next night, it happened again. And the night after that, worse. He scratched until his paws were raw, until small spots of blood marked the wall like a constellation of tiny wounds. I bandaged his paws and locked him in the laundry room with food, water, and his favorite blanket. He cried until sunrise, a low keening sound that seemed to vibrate in my molars. Last night, I let him out. I don't know why. Maybe because the crying was unbearable, or maybe because some part of me, the part that my therapist said I needed to stop listening to, wanted to see what he would find. He went straight to the corner and resumed scratching at the exposed plaster. I sat on the couch and watched, my hands trembling around a glass of whiskey I don't remember pouring. He scratched for 2 hours, and then, just before dawn painted the windows gray, a piece of plaster the size of my palm fell away. Behind it was wood. Dark, old wood, running vertically in a pattern that didn't match the house's construction. I moved closer, my heart keeping a rhythm that felt arrhythmic, and pressed my fingers to the gap he'd created. It was a door that had been plastered over, hidden behind layers of wallpaper and time. A door that, according to the house's floor plan, should not exist. I haven't told my wife about the door. I've told myself it's because I don't want to worry her, but that's not entirely true. The truth is that I don't trust her reaction. Lately, there's been a distance between us that I can't explain. Not the slow drift of familiarity that marriages sometimes suffer, but something sharper, something deliberate. She looks at me sometimes when she thinks I'm not paying attention, and her expression is one I can't read. Concern, maybe, or calculation. 3 nights ago, I woke to find her side of the bed empty. I lay there in the dark, listening, and heard her voice drifting up from somewhere below. Soft, rhythmic, like she was having a conversation with someone. When I went downstairs, I found her in the kitchen, drinking water, alone. She said she couldn't sleep. She said she hadn't been talking to anyone. But her eyes were wrong. The pupils too large, the white too bright. And she smelled like something I couldn't identify. Something old. Something like the air that seeps from the gap in the wall. I've started sleeping with the bedroom door locked. She hasn't mentioned it. Yesterday, while she was at work, I tore more of the wall away. I told myself I was just investigating, just being practical, just trying to understand the house's construction so I could repair the damage the cat had done. But my hands shook as I pulled away strips of wallpaper and chunks of plaster, and my breath came in short gasps that fogged in the air, even though it was 70 degrees in the room. The cold seemed to emanate from behind the wall, a chill that had no source and no explanation. The door emerged inch by inch. It was made of wood so dark it was nearly black, and it had been sealed with nails, dozens of them, driven through the frame at irregular angles, as if whoever closed it was in a hurry, or terrified. The nails had rusted, leaving orange streaks down the wood like dried tears. There was no handle, no keyhole, just smooth, dark wood and those weeping nails. I pressed my ear to the door and listened. For a long moment there was nothing. Then, faint and far away, I heard something that might have been breathing, slow, patient, waiting. I stepped back so fast I tripped over the cat, who had appeared behind me without a sound. He was staring at the door with his head tilted at an angle that looked uncomfortable, that looked wrong, and he was purring. Not the contented rumble he makes when I scratch behind his ears, but something deeper, more resonant, like the vibration of a machine or a voice pitched too low for human hearing. I left the room and didn't go back in until my wife came home. She noticed the wall immediately. I had expected questions, accusations, the tight-lipped silence that she uses when she's angry but doesn't want to fight. Instead, she walked to the exposed door and placed her palm flat against the wood. She stood there for nearly a minute, perfectly still, while I watched from the doorway with my pulse pounding in my temples. When she finally turned around, she was smiling. Not her usual smile, the warm one that crinkles the corners of her eyes, but something thinner, something that showed too many teeth. She said we should open it. She said it in a voice that was hers but wasn't, a voice that had harmonics I'd never noticed before, undertones that seemed to resonate with the cold air seeping through the cracks in the frame. She said she'd always known the door was there. She said she'd been waiting for me to find it. I asked her what she meant. She didn't answer. She just kept smiling that thin smile and looking at me with those eyes that weren't quite right. And the cat wound between her ankles, purring that deep mechanical purr, and I realized with a certainty that settled in my bones like ice that something in this house had changed, or maybe something had always been wrong, and I was only now beginning to see it. I'm writing this at 2:47 a.m., sitting in my car in the driveway with the engine running and the heater on full blast. The house looms in my rearview mirror, all dark windows and sharp angles, and I can see a light in the living room that I didn't leave on, a single lamp, glowing amber, and a shadow moving behind the curtains. My wife didn't come to bed tonight. She said she wanted to read, but when I walked past the living room, she wasn't reading. She was standing in front of the door, running her fingers along the rusted nail heads, whispering something I couldn't hear. The cat was sitting at her feet, both of them facing the dark wood as if waiting for an invitation. I should drive away. I should check into a motel, call someone, my brother, my old therapist, anyone who might tell me I'm not crazy, that something is genuinely wrong here. But I know what they would say. They would talk about stress, about the strain of a new house, about the medication I stopped taking because it made me feel like I was watching my life through frosted glass. They would be logical. They would be kind. They would not believe me. And part of me, the part that counted the minutes of my cat's unblinking stare, the part that heard breathing behind a door that shouldn't exist, that part isn't sure I believe myself. Maybe I'm having an episode. Maybe the house is fine, my wife is fine, and the door is just an old cellar entrance that the previous owner sealed for perfectly mundane reasons. Maybe the cold is just poor insulation, the cat's behavior just feline eccentricity, my wife's strange smiles just the natural evolution of a marriage I've been too distracted to nurture. Maybe, but then I look in the rearview mirror and see the curtains part, and there's a face in the window that is my wife's but also isn't, watching me with those two large pupils, and behind her, in the corner of the room, I see another face, pale, indistinct, smiling the same thin smile, and next to them both, sitting perfectly still with his head tilted at that wrong angle, the cat. The light in the living room flickers once, twice, then goes out. I sit in the darkness of my car, listening to the engine's hum and the wild percussion of my heart, and I wait. For dawn. For clarity. For an explanation that doesn't require me to accept that my house has a door to somewhere else, that my wife has become a stranger, that something has been watching me through my cat's unblinking eyes since the moment we moved in. The cold is seeping through the car's vents now, that same sourceless chill, and when I look at the dashboard clock, it reads 3:14 a.m. In the house, a light turns on, then another, and I hear, faint but clear through the car's closed windows, the sound of nails being pulled from wood. Story 2. The static woke me again at 3:47 a.m. I knew the time without looking. My body had learned this hour the way it learns hunger or thirst, an instinct carved into the meat of me over weeks of interrupted sleep. The television hummed its white noise from the corner of the bedroom, casting that familiar gray-blue glow across the ceiling, painting shadows that seemed to breathe with each fluctuation of the signal. I reached for the remote on the nightstand. My wife shifted beside me, her breathing unchanged, undisturbed by the electronic hiss that had become the soundtrack of my nights. She never heard it. She never woke. Sometimes I wondered if the sound existed only for me. The TV clicked off. Darkness flooded the room like water filling a vessel, and I lay there in the sudden silence, staring at the black rectangle of the screen. My reflection was barely visible in the glass, a smudge of pale skin, the suggestion of features. I watched it for a long moment, waiting for something I couldn't name, before sleep finally dragged me back under. That was the pattern. Had been for 6 weeks, but last night was different. The static woke me at 3:47 a.m., as it always did. The gray light pulsed against my closed eyelids, and I felt the familiar weight of exhaustion pressing me into the mattress, that particular heaviness that comes from sleep interrupted night after night until your body forgets what rest feels like. I opened my eyes. The television showed static, the chaotic dance of black and white pixels that shouldn't exist anymore. Not with digital signals, not with modern sets. But there it was, churning and writhing like something alive, like a window into some space between channels, between realities. I reached for the remote, and then I saw myself. Not my reflection in the glass, something else, something in the static. My own face, rendered in that crawling gray snow, eyes closed, head tilted against what looked like my own pillow. I was watching myself sleep. The image flickered, jumping and tearing like corrupted video, but it was unmistakably me. Same stubble, same mole beneath my left ear, same slight part in my lips when I sleep, something my wife used to tease me about in better days. Then the image smiled. My sleeping face, the face on the screen, curved its lips upward in a slow, deliberate expression that I felt in my own cheeks, as if muscles were being pulled by invisible strings. It was a smile I didn't recognize, too wide, too knowing. I hit the power button so hard the remote cracked against my palm. The television died. The room plunged into darkness. I didn't sleep again that night. The morning came gray and reluctant, autumn light filtering through curtains that needed washing. I sat at the kitchen table with coffee I couldn't taste, watching my wife move through her routine. Toast, yogurt, a quick scroll through her phone. She didn't look at me. We had perfected the art of existing in the same space without acknowledging each other. Two ghosts haunting the same house. I wanted to tell her. The words sat in my throat like stones. I saw myself on the television. I saw myself smiling while I slept. But I knew how it would sound. I knew the look she would give me, that careful, measured expression she'd been wearing more and more lately, the one that made me feel like a specimen under glass. She asked if I was feeling all right. I told her I hadn't been sleeping well. She nodded, unsurprised, and said, maybe I should see someone about that. A doctor, a specialist. The implication hung between us, unspoken but heavy. After she left for work, I stood in front of the television. It was an old set, older than it should have been, really. We'd bought it when we first moved in together, back when such things still felt like shared adventures. The brand name had worn off the bezel years ago, leaving only a ghost of adhesive. The screen was dark now, innocent, just a rectangle of black glass reflecting the empty room. I pressed the power button. Morning news filled the screen, traffic reports, weather forecasts, the comfortable banality of the waking world. I flipped through channels, cooking shows, documentaries, a rerun of something from my adolescence. Nothing but ordinary signals, ordinary programming. I turned it off and went to work, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from behind the glass. That night, I unplugged the television. I pulled the cord from the wall with a sense of triumph that felt childish, even as I did it. No power, no static. Simple, logical. I stood there in the bedroom, looking at the dead set, and told myself that would be the end of it. My wife asked what I was doing. I told her I was tired of the screen's standby light keeping me awake. She accepted this without question. We had stopped questioning each other about small things, conserving our energy for larger battles. I fell asleep easily that night, lulled by the silence, by the certainty that I had solved the problem. The static woke me at 3:47 a.m. My eyes snapped open. The room glowed with that gray-blue light, the hum of white noise filling the air like a living thing. The television was on. The static churned across the screen, and I could see the plug lying on the floor, exactly where I had left it. The prongs catching the light from the screen it was no longer connected to. I couldn't move. Sleep paralysis, I told myself. I'd read about it, knew the symptoms, the feeling of weight on your chest, the inability to control your limbs. Hypnopompic hallucinations. The brain caught between sleeping and waking, generating images from the depths of itself. But I could feel my heart beating. I could feel the sweat cooling on my skin. I could feel my wife's warmth beside me, her breathing unchanged, oblivious. The static shifted. My face emerged from the noise, clearer than before, sharper. I watched myself sleeping on the screen, watched my chest rise and fall in perfect synchronization with my own breathing. The image turned its head slightly, as if getting comfortable, and I felt my own head turn against the pillow. Then the eyes opened. Not mine. I was still frozen, staring at the screen. But the eyes of the image, my eyes, opened and looked directly at me. They were wrong. The color was right, the shape was right, but there was something behind them that I didn't recognize, something that had been watching for a long time. The image smiled again. That same smile, too wide, too knowing. And then it spoke. I couldn't hear words, not exactly. The static swallowed the sound, chewed it into incomprehensible noise. But I understood anyway, the way you understand things in dreams, meanings transmitted directly into the brain without the intermediary of language. "I've been waiting for you to see." The television clicked off. I could move again. I sat up, gasping, and reached for my wife. But she was already turning away, pulling the blanket over her shoulder, lost in whatever dreams visited her in the night. I didn't tell her. What could I possibly say? The following days became a study in disintegration. I started avoiding the bedroom. I told my wife I'd been having trouble sleeping, that I didn't want to disturb her. A convenient half-truth that she accepted with something that might have been relief. I sat up on the couch, but the living room television began turning on at 3:47 a.m., showing that same static, that same face. I moved to the kitchen. The microwave's digital display would flicker and die, then come back showing nothing but snow. Every reflective surface became a potential window. I caught glimpses in mirrors, in windows, in the chrome fixtures of the bathroom, always peripheral, always vanishing when I looked directly. My own face, but wrong. Smiling when I wasn't smiling. Eyes open when my eyes were closed. A version of me that existed just out of phase, watching from the other side of the glass. I began to catalog the differences. The smile was the most obvious. That wide, knowing expression that my face had never made, that my muscles didn't know how to produce. But there were smaller things. The way the image held its head, tilted slightly to the left, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. The way its eyes tracked movement a fraction of a second before mine did, anticipating rather than reacting. The way it seemed to be more present than I was, more solid, more real. I started taking photographs of myself, dozens of them, comparing angles, comparing expressions. My wife found me in the bathroom one night, phone in hand, flash going off again and again. She asked what I was doing. I told her I thought I looked different. She stared at me for a long moment, then said we needed to talk. We didn't talk. We never talked anymore. But I saw her making calls when she thought I wasn't watching, speaking in low tones, her face drawn with concern that might have been love, or might have been something else entirely. I started staying awake. Coffee at first, then energy drinks, then caffeine pills that made my hands shake and my heart stutter. If I didn't sleep, I reasoned, I couldn't wake to the static. If I kept my eyes open, I couldn't see myself sleeping on the screen. Logic, reason, control. But the static found me anyway. I was sitting in the dark living room, 43 hours into my vigil, when the television turned on. I hadn't touched it, hadn't even looked at it. But suddenly there it was. The hiss, the glow, the churning gray snow that had become more familiar than my own heartbeat. I saw myself on the screen, and this time, I was awake. The image sat in a living room that was almost mine. Same furniture, same layout, same stains on the carpet. But the proportions were wrong, the angles slightly off, like a photograph taken through a warped lens. And the me on the screen sat perfectly still, hands on knees, head tilted, smiling that terrible smile, watching me watch him. I stood up. The image stood up. I raised my hand. The image raised its hand. I stepped toward the television, and the image stepped toward its television, and we approached each other like dancers in a mirror, like lovers meeting at the surface of a pond. I was close enough to touch the screen when I realized the image was still smiling. I wasn't. My wife moved out yesterday. She said she needed space, needed time, needed me to get help before she could come back. She said she loved me. She said she was worried. She said a lot of things that I heard through a fog of exhaustion and fear, words that seemed to come from very far away. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. How could I explain? The house is quiet now. I've covered every mirror, every window, every reflective surface I can find. The televisions are in the garage, stacked on top of each other, their screens facing the wall. I've taped over the microwave display, the bathroom fixtures, even the glossy photos in their frames. But I can still feel him watching. At 3:47 this morning, I woke to silence. No static, no glow, just the darkness of the bedroom and the empty space where my wife used to sleep. I lay there in the quiet, wondering if it was finally over, if I had somehow broken the pattern by removing every possible window between our worlds. Then I felt it, a pressure in my face, a tightening around my mouth, muscles moving without my permission, pulling my lips upward, stretching them wide, wider than they should go, into a smile I didn't recognize. I stumbled to the bathroom, tore the tape from the mirror. My reflection stood there, hands at its sides, face neutral, watching me with eyes that held no expression at all. But I was still smiling. I'm still smiling, I can't stop. I've been sitting here for hours now, typing this account, trying to understand what's happening to me, trying to find some explanation that doesn't lead where I think it leads. My face aches. My cheeks burn. The smile stretches on, permanent now, a mask I can't remove. I don't know which one of us is in the mirror anymore. I don't know which one of us is typing these words. I don't know if I'm the one who woke up or the one who was waiting to wake up. But I know this. The static is quiet now, and somewhere, on the other side of every dark screen, something that looks like me is finally sleeping. Story 3. The stain appeared on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were the only nights my wife worked late, and I had developed the habit of lying in bed alone, staring at the ceiling, counting the minutes until her headlights swept across the window. That first night, I noticed nothing more than a watermark the size of a dinner plate, vaguely circular, the color of weak tea bleeding through white paint. I made a mental note to call someone about it in the morning. I didn't. By Thursday, the stain had grown, not dramatically, perhaps an inch or two in diameter, but enough that I found myself studying it with uncomfortable attention. The shape had shifted too. Where before it had been roughly round, now it suggested something else. Two darker patches near the top, a slight protrusion below them. The geometry of features that shouldn't have been there. I told myself it was pareidolia, the same trick of perception that makes us see faces in clouds, in wood grain, in the random pattern of bathroom tiles. The human brain is wired to find faces everywhere, I reasoned. It means nothing. It proves nothing. But I couldn't stop looking. The bedroom had always been the coldest room in our small house. A second-floor corner space with windows that let in drafts no matter how many times I sealed them with weather stripping. That week, the cold seemed to intensify, pooling in the air directly beneath the stain like something heavy and liquid. I started sleeping with an extra blanket. Then, too, my wife complained that I was hogging the covers, that she woke up sweating while I lay beside her, teeth chattering, my eyes fixed on the ceiling. She couldn't see it. Or rather, she could see the stain. She acknowledged its existence, even agreed that we should have someone look at it, but she couldn't see what I saw. When I pointed out the features, the unmistakable configuration of eyes and nose and the dark slash that suggested a mouth, she squinted and tilted her head and finally shrugged. "Water damage," she said. "Nothing more." Her voice carried that particular tone she reserved for moments when she thought I was being difficult, and I let the subject drop. But I knew what I saw. The plumber came on Saturday morning, a heavy-set man with calloused hands and a flashlight he used to examine every pipe and joint in the house. He spent 45 minutes in the attic, another 20 in the walls, and emerged with a puzzled expression that did nothing to settle my nerves. "No leaks," he said. "No moisture anywhere in the system. The pipes were bone dry." He suggested the stain might be old, something from before we moved in that had simply taken time to bleed through the paint. I nodded and paid him and watched him drive away, and then I went upstairs and stared at the ceiling for the rest of the afternoon. The stain had grown again. Darker now. More defined. That night I dreamed of water. Not the clean, rushing water of rivers or rain, but something else. Stagnant, thick, pressing against my face with the weight of centuries. I woke gasping, my lungs burning, my skin slick with sweat that felt oilier than it should have. The room was pitch black. The digital clock on the nightstand had gone dark, its red numbers extinguished by a power outage that must have occurred while I slept. I lay there in the darkness, listening to my wife's steady breathing beside me, and I felt it, the sensation of being watched. It started as a prickle at the base of my skull, a primitive warning that predates language and logic. Something was looking at me, something directly above. I didn't want to turn on my phone. I didn't want to see. But my hand moved anyway, guided by a compulsion I couldn't name, and when the pale glow of the screen illuminated the ceiling, I saw them. The eyes were open. They weren't detailed. Not yet. Just two darker patches within the stain, two circles of deeper brown that caught the light in a way that made them seem almost wet, almost alive. They were fixed on me. I knew this with a certainty that bypassed rational thought, settled directly into the animal part of my brain that still remembers what it means to be prey. I lay frozen for what felt like hours. The phone's light timed out and the room plunged back into darkness, but I didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't dare close my eyes. When dawn finally crept through the curtains, I was still awake, still staring upward, watching the first gray light reveal the stain in all its terrible detail. The eyes were closed again. Just water damage, just discoloration on an old ceiling. I called in sick to work that Monday. I told my wife I had a headache, which was technically true. A dull, persistent throb that had taken up residence behind my left eye and refused to leave. She accepted the explanation without question, kissed my forehead, told me to rest. The front door closed behind her. I listened to her car start and pull away. Then I went upstairs. I'm not sure what I expected to find. The stain unchanged, perhaps, confirming that I had imagined the whole thing. Or the stain gone entirely, erased by whatever strange process had created it. What I found was neither. The face was more distinct now. The features had sharpened overnight, as if someone had taken a blurry photograph and slowly brought it into focus. I could make out the ridge of a brow, the bridge of a nose. The lips, if they were lips, were pressed together in a thin line that suggested neither smile nor frown, but something else, something patient. The eyes remained closed, two curved shadows beneath the brow, and I stood beneath them with my neck craned back, my heart hammering against my ribs, waiting. For what? I couldn't say, but I waited. The hours passed with the sluggish unreality of fever dreams. I brought a chair from the kitchen and positioned it directly beneath the stain, sat there with my hands gripping the armrests, watching. The face didn't move, the eyes didn't open, but the stain continued to grow, creeping outward across the ceiling like something alive, like something breathing, expanding its boundaries by fractions of inches that I could almost see happening in real time. The cold intensified. My breath began to mist in the air, pale clouds that rose toward the ceiling and seemed to be absorbed by the spreading darkness above. The temperature had to have dropped 20 degrees since morning, but when I checked the thermostat, it read 72. The heating system hummed steadily in the walls. The house was warm, the bedroom was not. I started keeping a notebook. Measurements, observations, times and dates. The stain was 18 inches across on Monday afternoon, 19 by evening, 21 when I finally forced myself to bed, my wife already asleep, her body radiating a heat I desperately craved but couldn't seem to absorb. I lay as close to her as I could without waking her, my back pressed against her back, my eyes fixed on the ceiling, and I watched. The eyes opened at 3:47 a.m. I know the exact time because I had turned my phone toward the ceiling, using its glow to illuminate the stain, and I saw the moment happen. The two dark patches shifted, expanded, became holes that looked down at me with an attention that felt like pressure, like gravity, like the weight of deep water pressing against every inch of my skin. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. I could only lie there, pinned by that gaze, while something cold and wet dripped onto my forehead. When I finally managed to reach up and touch the spot, my fingers came away dry. My wife found me on the floor the next morning, curled in the corner of the room farthest from the bed. I had no memory of moving there. She wanted to call a doctor. I told her I was fine, just sleepwalking, nothing to worry about. The lie tasted like copper in my mouth. She looked at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable, and then she looked up at the ceiling. I watched her face carefully, searching for any sign that she saw what I saw. Her eyes moved across the stain, took in its expanded borders, its darkened center, the features that had become unmistakable to me. Her brow furrowed slightly, then smoothed. "Just water damage," she said again. "We really should get that fixed." I wanted to grab her shoulders. I wanted to shake her until she admitted the truth, until she acknowledged the face that was forming above our bed, the eyes that watched us sleep, the mouth that seemed to grow wider every night. But I said nothing. I nodded. I smiled. I went to work and sat at my desk for 8 hours, accomplishing nothing, seeing nothing but that face burned into my vision like the afterimage of a bright light. The plumber returned at my wife's insistence. A different man this time, younger, with the efficiency that bordered on brusque. He spent less time than his predecessor, checked fewer pipes, and emerged from the attic with the same verdict. No leaks, no moisture, no explanation. He suggested we paint over the stain. I laughed at that, a sound that came out sharper and stranger than I intended. He left quickly. That night, I dreamed the face spoke to me. I couldn't hear the words. The voice came from somewhere too deep, too far, vibrating at a frequency below the threshold of human hearing. But I understood them anyway, the way you understand things in dreams, through intuition and dread. It told me it had always been there. It told me the stain was just a window, a thin place where something old and patient had found a way to look through. It told me it had been watching this room for longer than the house had existed, longer than the street, longer than anything built by human hands. It was just waiting for someone to look back. I woke with a taste of stagnant water in my mouth. The stain now covered nearly half the ceiling. The face filled most of it, the features rendered in shades of brown and black that seemed to shift when I looked at them too long. The eyes were always open now, always watching, tracking my movements with a terrible patience. My wife slept through the night without waking. I lay beside her, not sleeping, not blinking, watching the face that watched me. I started taking photographs, dozens of them, at different times of day, with different lighting conditions. In the images, the stain looked exactly like what my wife claimed it was. Nothing more than water damage, a random pattern of discoloration that vaguely suggested humanoid features if you squinted hard enough. But that wasn't what I saw when I looked at the ceiling directly. What I saw was something else. Something that couldn't be captured. Something that existed only in the space between the stain and my eyes. I began to wonder if I was losing my mind. The thought should have frightened me more than it did. Instead, it brought a strange kind of relief. If I was going insane, then the face wasn't real. If I was going insane, then there was nothing watching me from the ceiling. Nothing ancient and patient pressing against the thin membrane of reality, waiting for an opportunity to push through. Madness was an explanation. Madness was almost comforting. But then my wife started sleeping poorly. She didn't mention the face. She still couldn't see it, still dismissed my increasingly frantic observations with that particular tone. But she began waking in the middle of the night, gasping, her hands clutching at her throat as if fighting off invisible water. She complained of cold. She complained of dreams she couldn't remember, but that left her shaking and pale. She started avoiding the bedroom, finding excuses to fall asleep on the couch, to work late, to be anywhere but beneath that spreading darkness. She could feel it, I realized. Even if she couldn't see it, she could feel it watching. Last night I woke to find her standing in the center of the room. She was facing the ceiling, her head tilted back, her eyes reflecting the faint light from the window. She wasn't moving. She wasn't breathing. She stood perfectly still, and I watched her through half-closed eyes, not daring to move, not daring to speak, as her lips began to form words I couldn't hear. Then she turned and looked at me, and for just a moment, a single, terrible moment, her eyes were the wrong color. Too dark, too deep, too much like the eyes in the stain. She blinked. Her eyes were normal again. She asked me what I was staring at. I told her nothing. She went back to sleep. I've been sitting in this chair all day. The stain covers the entire ceiling now. A vast face that looks down at me with an expression I've finally learned to read. It isn't malevolent, not exactly. It isn't hungry or angry or evil in any way I can describe. It's simply interested, curious. It wants to see. It wants to understand. And it's been waiting so long for someone to look back, to acknowledge its presence, to make the connection that completes whatever circuit allows it to fully enter our world. I made that connection. I looked when I should have turned away. I acknowledged what should have remained unseen. And now I can feel it behind my eyes. Not constantly. Not yet. But in moments, in the space between thoughts, I catch glimpses of what it sees. The ceiling from below. My own face, pale and haggard, staring upward. My wife sleeping fitfully in the bed. Her dreams infected by something neither of us can name. The house, the street, the world, all seen from somewhere impossibly high and impossibly close. Watched by something that has always been watching, that will always be watching, that exists in the thin spaces between what we see and what is really there. I know I should leave. I know I should walk out of this room, out of this house, and never look back. But I can't stop watching. I can't stop looking up. And somewhere deep in the stain, in the darkness that has become a face that has become a window, something is looking back at me. It knows my name now. It knows where I live. And tonight, when the lights go out and my wife lies sleeping beside me and the cold settles over the bed like a burial shroud, it will open its mouth for the first time. I don't know what it will say. I'm not sure I want to know. But I'll be watching when it happens. I'll be watching because I can't look away anymore. Because looking is all I have left. Because somewhere between that first stain and this final night, I became the thing that watches back. And in the end, maybe that was always the point. Story 4. The first time I noticed the footprints, I blamed myself for being careless. A glass of water spilled in the night, perhaps. Some mundane accident my half-asleep brain had already forgotten. I wiped the kitchen tiles with a dish towel and thought nothing more of it. But when I wrung the cloth over the sink, the water that dripped out was ice cold. Colder than anything that could have come from our pipes in late August. That should have been my first warning. The house had belonged to my wife's grandmother, a rambling Victorian structure on the edge of town where the streetlights grew sparse, and the nearest neighbor sat a quarter-mile down a winding gravel road. We'd inherited it 3 years ago, and in that time, I'd grown accustomed to its peculiarities. The way the stairs groaned in specific sequences at night, as if someone were descending them with deliberate slowness. The draft that seemed to breathe through the walls when the wind was still. The basement door that never stayed fully closed no matter how firmly I latched it. Old houses have their moods, I told myself. Their memories pressed into the wood and stone. But the footprints were something new. They appeared again the next morning. Wet impressions on the kitchen floor, each one perfectly formed. The arch of a foot, the rounded suggestion of toes, the heel pressed deeper as though bearing significant weight. They led from the basement door across the kitchen, through the hallway, up the stairs. I followed them with a growing tightness in my chest, watching how the moisture caught the early morning light, how the trail grew fainter as it ascended but never quite disappeared. The footprints ended at the side of my bed, my side, right where I'd been sleeping. I stood there for a long time, staring at the carpet where the last faint impression darkened the fibers. My wife had already left for work. Her nursing shifts started before dawn, and the house held that particular silence of spaces that know they're being watched. I found myself listening for something, though I couldn't have said what. A creak, a breath, the wet slap of bare feet on hardwood. Nothing came. I checked the basement that afternoon, telling myself I was looking for a leak. The stone steps descended into a darkness that seemed thicker than mere absence of light, a darkness that pressed against my flashlight beam like something with weight. The walls were dry, the floor was dry, no pipes dripped, No moisture gathered in the corners where the foundation met earth. The only water in that basement existed in my imagination, and in the footprints that shouldn't have been possible. The smell down there was what I remembered longest. Not mold exactly, nor the mineral scent of wet stone, but something older. Something that made me think of deep wells and closed spaces, and things that had been still for a very long time. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the house settle around me, each sound amplified by the darkness until even my own heartbeat seemed intrusive. My wife breathed softly beside me, her warmth a small comfort against the chill that seemed to radiate from the walls themselves. At some point, I heard the basement door swing open, that distinctive creak I'd come to know as intimately as my own voice. I waited for it to close. The creak never came. I didn't go downstairs to check. I told myself it was because I didn't want to wake my wife, but the truth sat heavier in my stomach, a weight I wasn't ready to examine. The morning brought more footprints. They were darker now, wetter, and something about their shape had changed in a way I couldn't immediately identify. I crouched beside them in the pale kitchen light, studying the impressions while my coffee grew cold on the counter. The toes seemed longer than before, the arch more pronounced, and there, at the edge of each print, something that might have been... I wiped them away before I could finish the thought. My wife noticed my distraction at dinner. She asked if work was stressing me out, if I was sleeping enough, if I wanted to talk about whatever was clearly bothering me. I almost told her then. The words gathered at the back of my throat like a confession, and for a moment, I could feel how it would be to share this burden, to have someone else look at those footprints and confirm that, yes, they were real, yes, something was wrong. Instead, I told her I was fine, just tired. She accepted the lie with the easy trust of someone who'd never had reason to doubt me, and I hated myself for the relief I felt at not having to explain something I didn't understand. That was when the changes in my perception began. Small things at first, so small I could almost dismiss them. The basement door would be open when I swore I'd closed it. Objects would shift positions overnight. My keys moved from the counter to the table, my shoes arranged in pairs when I distinctly remembered kicking them off separately. The house seemed to watch me with a new intensity, its shadows gathering in corners where no shadows should fall, its silences punctuated by sounds just below the threshold of hearing. And the temperature. God, the temperature. No matter how high I set the thermostat, certain parts of the house refused to warm. The kitchen floor remained ice cold beneath my bare feet each morning. The stairs held a chill that made my breath fog if I climbed them in the early hours. And the basement door, I couldn't bring myself to touch it anymore. Even from several feet away, I could feel the cold radiating from its surface like something alive and waiting. The footprints grew more defined with each passing day. I measured them once, using a ruler from my desk drawer, my hands trembling slightly as I aligned the edge with the heel impression. 11 inches long, far larger than my own feet, far larger than my wife's delicate size 7s. The weight that had made them must have been substantial. The impressions were deep, the water pooling in them slow to evaporate. But the most disturbing detail was one I tried not to think about. The prints only ever led in one direction, from the basement up the stairs to my bed, never back. Whatever left them either vanished at my bedside or it stayed. I started sleeping with the lights on. My wife thought I was being ridiculous. Her word, softened by affection, but edged with concern. She couldn't see the footprints. By the time she woke each morning, I'd already erased them, scrubbing the evidence away as though that could undo whatever had made them. I told myself I was protecting her, but the truth was more selfish. I couldn't bear to see her look at those prints and tell me there was nothing there. Because sometimes, in the small hours when the house breathed its slow, cold breath, I caught myself wondering if I was the only one who could see them. The paranoia crept in like frost on a window, so gradual I barely noticed until everything was obscured. I found myself watching my wife from the corner of my eye, searching for signs that she was part of whatever was happening, that she knew something she wasn't telling me. I started checking the basement door multiple times a night, pressing my ear to the cold wood and listening for movement below. I stopped eating in the kitchen, stopped walking barefoot through the house, stopped touching anything more than absolutely necessary. The footprints responded to my fear. They began appearing in new places. The hallway outside the bathroom, the floor beside my desk in the study, the space just inside the closet in our bedroom. Always wet, always cold, always ending somewhere close to where I'd been standing or sitting or sleeping. I set up a camera once, pointed at the basement door, determined to capture whatever was making those nightly journeys. The footage showed nothing but an empty hallway, the door motionless in its frame, the darkness beyond utterly still. But when I reviewed the timestamps, I found gaps, minutes at a time where the recording simply stopped, replaced by static that hissed like whispered voices before resuming as though nothing had happened. In those gaps, the footprints appeared. My wife began sleeping at her sister's house. She said it was because of her early shifts, the long commute that left her exhausted and prone to accidents. But I saw the way she looked at me now, the careful distance she maintained when we were in the same room, the questions she no longer asked because she was afraid of my answers. I was losing her to whatever was happening in this house, and I couldn't explain it to her any more than I could explain it to myself. The night she left, I sat at the top of the stairs and watched the basement door until my eyes burned and my muscles ached from stillness. I didn't blink. I didn't breathe more than necessary. I simply watched and waited, convinced that if I could only see the moment when the door opened, I would understand. I would finally know whether I was witnessing something real, or whether my mind had finally cracked along some hidden fault line. The door never moved. I watched until dawn painted the windows gray, until my body betrayed me with exhaustion and my eyelids fell like stones. When I woke, I was no longer at the top of the stairs. I was in bed, my bed. The sheets were damp with condensation that smelled faintly of deep water and old stone. And beside me, pressed into the mattress with such force that the fabric had torn, was the impression of a body, long and heavy and unmistakably present, though the space was empty now. The footprints led from my bedside back to the basement door. For the first time, they went in both directions. I don't sleep anymore. Not really. I drift through the days in a fog of exhaustion, jumping at shadows, listening for sounds that may or may not exist outside my own deteriorating perceptions. The footprints appear whether I watch for them or not, whether I sleep or stay awake, whether I believe in them or try desperately to convince myself they're nothing but water stains and overactive imagination. My wife calls sometimes. Her voice sounds far away, distorted by more than just phone static, and I find myself struggling to remember what her face looks like, what her laugh sounds like, whether she was ever really here at all, or whether I invented her to keep the loneliness at bay. The basement door stands open now. I stopped trying to close it weeks ago, or maybe months. Time has become slippery, unreliable, pooling in strange patterns like the water on my kitchen floor. Sometimes I stand at the top of those stone steps and peer into the darkness below, trying to see what waits there, trying to understand what it wants. Last night I woke to the sound of breathing that wasn't my own. It was slow and wet, like air being drawn through waterlogged lungs, and it came from the space beside my bed where the footprints always ended. I lay motionless beneath sheets that had grown cold and damp, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of attention pressing down on me from somewhere I couldn't see. And then, so faint I might have imagined it, I felt something cold and wet brush against my ankle. A touch like drowned fingers, a greeting or a claiming, I couldn't tell. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I simply lay there until morning came and the presence withdrew, following its wet trail back down the stairs, through the kitchen, into the basement where the darkness swallowed it whole. The footprints were still there when I finally rose to face the day. Darker than ever. Deeper. And beside them, pressed into the floor with terrible clarity, was a second set of prints. These ones were smaller, familiar. The same shape as the feet I saw each morning when I stepped out of the shower. My own footprints, walking beside whatever comes from the basement, side by side, like companions, like partners in some nocturnal ritual I cannot remember. I traced the trail to the basement door and stood there for a long time, feeling the cold breath of that underground space wash over my skin. The darkness below seemed to pulse with a patience that had outlasted generations, that would outlast me too unless I found the courage to descend those stairs and discover what waited at the bottom, or unless I accepted what some part of me already suspected, that whatever dwells in that basement isn't visiting me anymore. It's becoming me. The footprints are still wet as I write this, still cold, still ending at the place where I lay my head each night. But now I see them differently. Now I see them for what they perhaps always were. Not an invasion, but a homecoming. Not a haunting, but a memory rising through the floorboards of a house that knows me better than I know myself. Tonight, when the house grows quiet and the basement door swings open on hinges that no longer creak, I won't resist. I'll follow the footprints down those stone stairs, into the dark, toward whatever truth has been waiting for me all along. After all, I've been making this journey every night for weeks now. I just couldn't remember until the footprints showed me the way. Story 5. The clock stopped again at 3:33. I noticed it on my third morning in the apartment, standing in the kitchen doorway with a mug of coffee cooling in my hands. The second hand hung suspended between tick and tock, frozen mid-journey, and something about the angle of the hour and minute hands, that sharp, angular configuration, made my stomach clench in a way I couldn't explain. I told myself it was the coffee, too strong on an empty stomach. I changed the batteries that afternoon. Duracell, fresh from the package. The clock resumed its patient revolution, and I forgot about it entirely until 2 days later, when I woke at dawn to find it stopped again. 3:33. The same impossible angle, the same suspended second hand. The apartment had come cheap for the neighborhood. A spacious one-bedroom in a pre-war building with original hardwood floors and crown molding thick with decades of paint. My wife had found the listing, had arranged the viewing, had signed her name next to mine on the lease while I was still marveling at the afternoon light pouring through the bay windows. We needed a fresh start, she said. A new chapter. The old place held too many memories of the year we'd rather forget. The miscarriage that had hollowed us both out and left something cold and distant in the space between us. I didn't ask why the rent was so low. I should have asked. The clock was already hanging on the living room wall when we moved in, a simple wooden thing, unremarkable, the kind of mass-produced decoration you'd find in any discount furniture store. The previous tenant must have left it behind, I assumed. An oversight. I meant to take it down and replace it with something of our own, but the weeks slipped past and the clock remained, its steady ticking becoming part of the apartment's ambient noise, unnoticed until it stopped. By the third week, I'd replaced the batteries 7 times. I tried different brands. I checked the mechanism for rust or debris. I even took the whole thing apart on the kitchen counter, examining each gear and spring with the obsessive focus of a man trying to solve an equation that refuses to balance. Nothing was wrong, nothing I could see. Yet every morning, without fail, I would find it frozen at 3:33. My wife suggested throwing it away. She said this casually over dinner, not looking up from her pasta, and something in her tone made me defensive. It was just a clock, I told her, a minor mechanical annoyance. I would figure it out. She didn't argue, but I caught her watching me later that night as I sat on the couch, staring at the clock's face, waiting for something I couldn't name. The building superintendent was an older man with nicotine-stained fingers and a wheeze that preceded him down hallways. I found him in the basement one evening, sorting through boxes of abandoned tenant belongings, and I asked about the apartment's history. Just curious, I said, making conversation. He didn't answer right away. He picked up a water-stained paperback, turned it over in his hands, set it down again. Then he told me about the man who'd lived there before us. A quiet tenant, he said. Kept to himself. Worked night shifts somewhere. A warehouse, maybe. Or a hospital. Hard to say. The superintendent had found him one morning after neighbors complained about the smell. He said this without inflection, as though describing a plumbing issue or a broken radiator. I asked how the man had passed, and the superintendent looked at me with something that might have been pity, or might have been warning. "Hanged himself," he said, "in the living room, from the light fixture." I nodded, thanked him for his time, and climbed the stairs to my apartment with legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. The living room light fixture was a simple brass thing, original to the building, sturdy enough to hold a man's weight. I stood beneath it for a long time that night, listening to the clock tick away the seconds. My wife asked what was wrong when she came home. "Nothing," I told her. "Just tired." I didn't mention the superintendent's story. I didn't mention that the medical examiner's report, which I'd looked up that night on my laptop, hunched in the blue glow of the screen while my wife slept, had listed the time of death as approximately 3:30 a.m. The dreams started after that. I don't remember them clearly, only fragments, impressions, the residue of something that vanished the moment I opened my eyes. A figure standing in the corner of the bedroom, a pressure on my chest like a hand pressing down, the sound of creaking rope, rhythmic and patient, coming from somewhere above me. I would wake gasping, drenched in sweat, and the first thing I would see in the darkness was the clock on the living room wall, visible through the open bedroom door, its hands frozen at 3:33. Always 3:33. I began sleeping with the door closed, but I could still hear it. The clock. Its ticking was louder now, or perhaps I had simply become more attuned to it. Even when it stopped, especially when it stopped, I could feel its presence, an absence of sound that was somehow louder than any noise. I found myself checking it compulsively throughout the day, watching the second hand's patient journey, waiting for the moment when it would freeze. My wife noticed the change in me. She asked if I was sleeping well. She asked if something was bothering me at work. She asked why I kept looking at the clock, why I flinched whenever she touched me without warning, why I'd started leaving lights on throughout the apartment even during the day. I told her I was fine. I told her work was stressful. I told her the lights were just habit, nothing more. But I could see the doubt in her eyes, the careful way she studied me when she thought I wasn't looking. We had been through enough together that she knew when I was hiding something. But how could I explain what I didn't understand myself? The temperature in the living room began to feel wrong. Not cold exactly, not the classic cliché of ghostly cold, but thick, heavy. The air seemed to press against my skin like water, and sometimes I would catch myself holding my breath without knowing why, as though breathing too deeply might draw attention to my presence. Presence from what? I couldn't say, but the feeling of being watched had settled into my bones, constant and unshakable, the certainty that something was aware of me in that room. I started working late at the office to avoid going home. When I finally returned each night, I would pause outside the apartment door, key in hand, and listen. I don't know what I expected to hear. Footsteps, maybe. The creak of rope. The tick of a clock that should have stopped hours ago. But there was only silence, and somehow that was worse. One night, it must have been nearly 2 months after we moved in, I woke to find myself standing in the living room. I have no memory of getting out of bed, no memory of walking down the hall. I was simply there, barefoot on the cold hardwood, wearing nothing but my boxer shorts, staring up at the clock. The apartment was dark except for the streetlight glow filtering through the curtains, casting everything in shades of yellow and shadow. And the clock was running, its second hand swept smoothly around the dial, tick by tick, measuring out the silence. I watched it for what felt like hours. I watched it pass 3 o'clock. I watched the minute hand creep toward the 6. 3:30, 3:31, 3:32. At 3:33, the second hand stopped, and something in the corner of my vision moved. I didn't turn to look. Every instinct I possessed screamed at me not to turn, not to acknowledge what I had seen, or thought I had seen, in the shadows near the window. A shape that might have been a man, a silhouette that hung at an angle that made no sense unless... I closed my eyes. I counted to 10. When I opened them again, the corner was empty, and the clock was ticking normally, its hands showing 3:47. I went back to bed and lay awake until morning, listening to my wife's breathing, listening to the clock, listening to the apartment settle and creak around me like a living thing. The next day, I took the clock down. I put it in the hall closet, behind boxes of winter clothes and forgotten exercise equipment. I told myself that was the end of it. No more stopped clocks. No more 3:33. Whatever psychological snag had caught me, whatever stress-induced obsession had taken root, I was cutting it out at the source. My wife noticed its absence but said nothing, and I was grateful for her silence. For 3 days, things seemed better. I slept through the night. The living room felt like a normal room again. Just space, just walls and furniture. No thickness in the air, no sense of something watching. I began to think I had imagined it all. That grief and guilt and sleeplessness had twisted my perceptions until I saw patterns where none existed. Then I found the marks on the ceiling. I was changing a light bulb in the living room, the brass fixture, the one original to the building, when I noticed them. Scratches in the plaster, faint but distinct, arranged in a pattern that made my hands go cold. Tallies. Someone had scratched tallies into the ceiling around the light fixture. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, in tight clusters that radiated outward like the rays of a dark sun. I got a flashlight and climbed onto a chair for a closer look. The scratches were old, painted over multiple times but still visible if you knew where to look. And among them, carved deeper than the rest, were numbers. 333, 333, 333, over and over. 333. That night I told my wife everything. The clock, the superintendent's story, the dreams, the figure in the corner, the marks on the ceiling. I told her I thought I was losing my mind, that I didn't know what was real anymore, that I woke every night at 3:33 even without the clock on the wall. My phone confirmed it, time after time, like some internal alarm I couldn't switch off. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she took my hands in hers and told me she believed me. She believed that I was experiencing something, that my fear was real, but she also said, gently, carefully, that we should talk to someone. A professional. She had noticed changes in me, she admitted. The paranoia, the insomnia, the way I startled at small noises and stared at empty corners. She was worried about me. We had been through so much already, and she didn't want to lose me to something we could treat if we only asked for help. I agreed. What else could I do? She was right. Either something supernatural was happening, or something was wrong with my mind, and in both cases, I needed help. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and somewhere around 2 a.m. I heard it. The clock. Ticking. Steady and rhythmic and impossible, because the clock was in the closet, because I had taken out its batteries, because there was no way. I got up and went to the closet. I stood in the hallway for a long time, listening to the tick, tick, tick coming from behind the door, before I finally opened it. The clock was still there, exactly where I'd left it. Its face was dark, its hands still. No batteries, no movement, no sound. But as I watched, the second hand trembled. It jerked forward one notch, then another, fighting against nothing, driven by nothing. And behind me from the living room I heard the creak of rope. I didn't turn around. I stood there in the closet doorway, watching the clock's dead hands begin to move, and I counted the seconds in my head. 1, 2, 3. The creaking continued, rhythmic and patient, the sound of weight shifting, of something swinging gently in the dark. I thought about the man who had lived here before me. I thought about his night shifts, his solitude, his quiet desperation that had led him to that brass fixture in the living room. I thought about the tallies on the ceiling, and I understood suddenly what they meant. He had tried to stop it too. The clock's hands reached 3:33 and stopped. The creaking stopped. The apartment fell silent. I closed the closet door. I walked back to the bedroom. I climbed into bed beside my wife and lay there until morning, listening to her breathe, trying not to think about what I had heard. We're moving out next week. My wife found a new place on the other side of the city, and I signed the lease without even seeing it. I don't care what it looks like. I don't care what it costs. I just need to leave. But last night, as I was packing boxes in the living room, I glanced up at the ceiling and noticed something I hadn't seen before. The tallies, the hundreds of small scratches around the light fixture, weren't random after all. They were grouped in clusters of 33, and some of them weren't just scratches, some of them were letters. I didn't look closely enough to read what they said. I didn't want to know. But I saw my own handwriting among them, my own jagged scrawl, scratched into the plaster in a place I don't remember reaching, spelling out a number I can't forget. 3:33. The clock is still in the closet. I haven't touched it. I've stopped changing its batteries. But this morning, when I woke gasping from another dream I couldn't remember, my wife asked me why I was standing on a chair in the middle of the night, reaching toward the ceiling with something sharp in my hand. I couldn't answer her. I don't remember getting up. I don't remember the chair. I don't remember the screwdriver I found clutched in my fist, its tip white with plaster dust. But my fingernails were broken and bleeding, and when I looked at the ceiling above the brass fixture, I saw fresh marks among the old ones, new tallies, new numbers, and the clock in the closet, batteryless and still, read 3:33. I've started to wonder if leaving will make any difference. I've started to wonder if the problem isn't the apartment at all, if whatever lived here, whatever happened here, didn't stay behind when the previous tenant left. The superintendent told me the man had been quiet, kept to himself, worked night shifts. Nothing unusual until the end. I keep thinking about that, about how normal everything seemed from the outside, about how long a person can spiral before anyone notices, about whether the scratches on the ceiling were a warning or an invitation. It's 3:27 now. I'm sitting in the living room writing this on my laptop, and the clock is still in the closet, and my wife is still asleep, and the apartment is silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. But I can feel it starting again. The thickness in the air, the weight of attention, the certainty that I am not alone in this room, that something is watching, waiting, counting down the seconds until... The refrigerator just stopped humming. The traffic has gone quiet, and somewhere in the closet, behind the winter clothes and forgotten exercise equipment, I can hear ticking. Story 6. The dust moves when I hold my breath. I discovered this 3 weeks ago on a Tuesday that smelled like rain and something else, something faintly organic, like wet earth disturbed after years of stillness. I had been lying in bed unable to sleep when I noticed it. A thin layer of dust motes drifting in the sliver of streetlight that cuts through the gap in my curtains. They swirled in a pattern that had nothing to do with the stagnant air of my bedroom. They rose and fell, in a rhythm that was unmistakably breath. I told myself it was the heating system. The old radiator beneath the window, perhaps, pushing warm air through invisible currents, but the heating had been off for days. Spring had finally arrived, bringing with it a humidity that clung to everything like a second skin. And besides, the movement was wrong. It came from below, from beneath the bed where I lay frozen, watching the particles dance in their terrible, patient rhythm. That was the first night I didn't sleep. My wife noticed the change in me before I could articulate what was happening. She asked why I had started sleeping on the couch, why I flinched when she mentioned going to bed, why I kept all the lights on in the hallway now. I told her I was stressed about work, a convenient lie that she accepted with the tired resignation of someone who had heard similar excuses before. We had been married for 11 years, long enough for her to recognize when I was keeping something from her, but also long enough to know when not to push. The truth was simpler and more terrifying. I was afraid to be in our bedroom, afraid to lie down in the bed we had shared for over a decade, afraid to close my eyes knowing that something was there, in the dark space between the floor and the mattress, breathing. I tried to rationalize it. Stress-induced hallucinations, perhaps. Sleep deprivation playing tricks on my exhausted mind. I even considered carbon monoxide poisoning. I had read somewhere that it could cause paranoia, a sense of presence, visual disturbances. I bought a detector and installed it myself. checking it obsessively every few hours. It never went off. The house was safe, according to the small electronic device on our bedroom wall. The house was perfectly safe, but the dust kept moving. After the first week, I began documenting the phenomenon. I would lie awake, my phone's camera pointed toward the floor, recording hours of nothing. In the morning, I would scrub through the footage with bloodshot eyes, looking for evidence of what I had seen. The videos showed only darkness, occasionally interrupted by the ambient glow of passing cars. No movement, no breathing, nothing that would convince anyone, including myself, that I wasn't losing my mind. Yet every night, when I forced myself back into that bed, I could see it. The gentle disturbance of particles, the slow, deliberate expansion and contraction of air being moved by something that should not exist. I started paying attention to the temperature too, and I noticed that it was always colder near the edge of the bed. Not dramatically so, just a few degrees, enough to raise goosebumps on my arms when I reached toward the floor. Enough to make me pull my limbs back toward the center of the mattress like a child afraid of monsters. The irony was not lost on me. I was 43 years old, a grown man with a mortgage and a career, and a wife who was beginning to look at me with something that hovered between concern and fear. And I was terrified of the space beneath my own bed. I thought about looking. The idea circled my mind like a vulture, persistent and patient. Just bend down, lift the bed skirt, and shine a light into that darkness. Prove to yourself that there is nothing there. That the dust is just dust, the cold is just poor insulation. The breathing is just your own paranoid imagination echoing back at you. But I never did. Something stopped me every time. A visceral animal instinct that screamed at me to keep my eyes forward, to never acknowledge what might be watching from below. There are things, I think, that we are not meant to see. Things that exist in the periphery of our perception, surviving only because we refuse to look directly at them. I was not ready to discover what would happen if I broke that unspoken rule. Then came the night of the hand. It was a Thursday, or perhaps a Friday. The days had begun to blur together by then.